Good morning, friends, and welcome to this Thursday morning, the last day of the week as far as our studies are concerned, our episodes are concerned. I'm PB. I'm Pastor Brian, the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church, and that's the reason for the title of our program. PB reads the Bible. Hang on one sec. This vibrated? No, nothing for me to. Excuse me. There we go. Got that taken care of now. Anyway, this is another episode of PB Reads the Bible, and it is episode 20 on our journey through the Gospel of John. We're going to be looking at chapter 18 today. We're not going to read the whole thing today. We're going to get through half of it, maybe a little bit more than half. Then we'll take a pause, take a beat, and then tomorrow we'll finish 18 and probably go into 19. Not tomorrow. Monday, we will finish 18 and probably go into 19 a little bit anyway. But for today, we're just going to do part of chapter 18, part of chapter 18. So go ahead and check in. I see some folks are already doing that. But if you haven't done it yet, go ahead. Say hello. Facebook only tells me a number of people, and I like to know who it is. And that way we can stay connected. It's good to be together in this way. Good morning, Marcia. Good morning, Ron. Good morning, John and Cindy. Good to have you folks joining with us this morning. It's good to be together. It is good to be together. And how is it with your soul? That's our question for the day, question for the week. I think maybe next week I'll use a different one of the questions. John Wesley, it depends on which list you look at or who you listen to, came down with either 21 or 22 questions that he had the early Methodists, the early people in the Methodist movement using in their daily lives and in their weekly sessions, gatherings together in classes and bands. And one of those questions, the first one is, how is it with your soul? How is it with your soul? It is well. Good to hear, Pat. Good to hear, Pat. Good morning to you. Good morning. Hello, Cheryl. It is well. It is well. Good. Good. Yeah, so no real announcements today. Today's going to be it for this week. Tomorrow is Sabbath. Saturday is Sue Day. And of course, Sunday is worship, 8:15 and 10:45 in person. 10:45 is also live streamed if you wanted to join us that way. As we continue looking at the resurrection reactions. Resurrection reactions. Last week we talked about Mary. This week we'll be talking about the guards at the tomb, possibly also the Jewish leaders that they reported back to, based on the Gospel of Matthew. So yeah, we'll be reading the resurrection story again, although this week we'll be using the Matthew version, and then in a couple weeks we're going to be reading it again. I believe that one is from the Luke, though. Going by memory on that. But all of the readings for the next few weeks will be resurrection related, either the resurrection itself or one of the stories just after it. But not yet, not in our gospel reading this week or today, not in our reading for today. We're not quite there yet with our readings through John, but we're getting close. Because John chapter 18, the first 12 verses is the arrest, is how this Bible that I'm using today identifies that as the arrest. Good morning, Marilyn. Good to have you with us this morning as well. Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and read, and I'm going to read the whole thing, and then we'll talk about some individual pieces as we go through. All right, we'll go back and we'll go through it. But I want to read 1 through 12 as one piece. And you're probably familiar with some of these with these words. And actually, if you worshiped with us last Thursday, you heard these words in one of my readings. I believe I did. Yeah. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am. So if you're looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. Pause. So, and it wasn't last Thursday that I read this. I read something different Thursday, but this was part of the reading on Good Friday. If you worshiped, if you watched that, if you worshiped that on Good Friday. Anyway, so first I wanted to point out the difference between John's telling of this part of the story of the saga versus the synoptic gospels. The synoptics have Jesus in the garden, and they describe him as being tormented and in prayer, in deep prayer. And Luke says that he was sweating, and his sweat was like drops of blood. He wasn't sweating blood. Luke doesn't say that. His sweat was like drops of blood. Let us think real viscous, real heavy, real thick, and dropping. But John doesn't have any of that. John doesn't have any of that in here, because this is Jesus's hour. This is all about Jesus's glorification and God's glorification through this hour, through his time. And he knows that this is his time, and he is still in charge. He is in charge through this whole thing, and we're going to see that in this story and in other parts as well. So he does not have. John does not have Jesus being in that spirit of torment and agony. The agony in the garden is how it is often described in the synoptics. John doesn't have that. John doesn't have that. Now, John does not tell us exactly where it is. Okay, the synoptics say Garden of Gethsemane, outside, and that it's near the Mount of Olives. John doesn't say that. He just says that he had to go out and across the Kidron Valley. It's in the same general area, so it's still. There's no need to make the gospel stories all perfectly align. There's really no need, because that's not the point of the authors. The differences are important for the authors, so let's keep those differences in place. For instance, the NIV translates, instead of translating it as a garden, they translate it as an olive grove. To try to, it would seem anyway, to try to make it match up better with the synoptics and the fact that it was on the Mount of Olives in their telling. That's not important though, and to change that, that's really not what the word means. The word means garden. Now here's the interesting thing though about the garden. Based on the language, and here actually the NRSV gets it wrong. Both say that they entered it or went into it. The NRSV says that they got to the garden and he and his disciples entered, and the NIV says they got to an olive grove. That's wrong. And he and his disciples went into it. And then in verse 4, uh, the NRSV gets it wrong. It says that Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward. The NIV actually gets it better, and says, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out, left the garden. So that language, and that's better for the Greek than this came forward. The entered and left, or went in and went out, entered and departed, has the connotation of some sort of a walled enclosure to the garden. It would describe it as that way. And Jesus again, it would also demonstrate Jesus still being in control and in charge of the whole thing. And so he makes the action of coming out from the garden to where these soldiers and Judas and police officers all were. Okay, so Jesus is still the actor. The others aren't. They're there, but Jesus is the man of action, and he comes out. Now, what else I find interesting in is this: a walled garden. A walled garden is literally the definition of paradise. So when Jesus speaks to the disciple, to the criminal on the cross in Luke, and says, "Today you will be with me in paradise," the word he uses there literally means walled garden of the king. Is how that word was used to describe someplace, or that's the word that was used to describe the walled garden of the king, as paradise. And so here we quite literally, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I find it interesting. Jesus is the king, and he's in this presumably walled garden, so it's paradise. Jesus is in paradise with his disciples. Anyway, but he comes out of the garden, comes out of paradise to be with all these soldiers and stuff. And it says a detachment, doesn't tell us how many. Could be 100, could be more, whatever, of soldiers, along with police, from the chief priests and the Pharisees. Now, John is the only one who links the Romans in with the Jewish leadership in the arrest of Jesus. The others just talk about the chief priests, guards, and stuff like that, and police being part of the arresting force. But here, would seem John is also placing blame upon the Romans for Jesus's arrest. Now, what's cool is, how do they come? They come well armed. They come armed, and they come bearing torches and lanterns, right? Lanterns, torches, and weapons is how they come. So they're assuming that force is going to be needed, that they're going to need to be forceful, that they're going to need to be violent in order to arrest Jesus. When that's not the case, Jesus willingly gives himself up. But they're also bringing torches and lanterns. So they're bringing sources of light in order to arrest the light of the world. I think that's important. I think that's something that John is, John has been loaded with irony, and this is pretty ironic that they need to bring light in order to arrest the light of the world, perhaps indicating how far into the darkness they are. And it is all in the darkness, including Judas. And he specifically says that Judas is there, but notice Judas also is not really an actor. He's just there, sort of, and as an aside, he's powerless, and so are they. And we're going to see that even more. I was going to say something else. Oh, the other reason that John probably has the this extra large group. Remember, several times before, the Jews had tried to arrest Jesus, but they were never able to accomplish the task. Why? Well, because it wasn't Jesus's time. But they're thinking that if we bring a whole lot of people and we come ready for a fight, and we're going to use violence if necessary to arrest this guy, we're finally going to arrest him. Well, they finally do arrest him, but not because of any of those things, but because now it is Jesus's time. Jesus's time has arrived. If you were following along when I got to verse 6, your translations probably said something a little bit different. When Jesus, sorry, verse 5, first of all, Jesus replied, I am. In the NRSV and the NIV and many other translations, it adds the preposition, or the pronoun he. It's not there in Greek. It's another one of those cases where that is not there. It's ego eimi, or eimi, sorry, ego eimi. So it's just I am. What happens when Jesus here says, I am? They step back and fall to the ground. Why? Well, there's a couple different explanations why. One, and I only heard this from one source, and I've never been able to find it in other sources. So keep that in mind. But I was once told from this one source that the Jewish tradition was, remember the one of the reasons why in Jewish tradition and in scripture, they never spoke the name YHWH. When they were reading it in scripture, they would say something else instead. They would say Adonai Elohim or something like that, and people would say, God's holy name. One of the reasons for that, probably the biggest reason is, excuse me, is that fear of saying it incorrectly and thereby violating the one of the 10 commandments, saying, do not use the Lord your God's name in vain. Thinking that was what that meant. It doesn't mean that, by the way. But so that's why they never said it, because they were afraid they would pronounce it wrong. The story that I was told from that one source, and I do trust the source, is that there was a Jewish tradition that when the Messiah came, he would be able to speak God's name and speak it correctly. Remember, we don't really know how YHWH is supposed to be pronounced because there are no consonants. I'm sorry, there are no vowels in there. We say Yahweh, but that's throwing in a couple of vowels. It may be right, may not be. But this Jewish tradition was that when the Messiah comes, he would be able to speak God's name properly. And when that happened, those who heard it would have to fall to their knees. So that's one source tells me that's one reason why this happened. Okay, that's one. Secondly, and this one I believe is good, that this is the proper position, we might say, for worship, and that when they heard God's name, they had almost a reflexive action of submission into worship, that they kind of had to do it. Okay, so that's two. Number three is to display the difference between who has the power in this scene and who are the powerless ones. Jesus still has all the power. And these guards, in spite of their weapons that they have, are still the powerless ones. And when Jesus speaks, they have no power to resist and have to submit. Jesus is still the one in power. Jesus is still the one in charge. All right. And so Jesus does say it a second time. I've already told you I am he. So if I'm the one you're looking for, why don't you let these guys go? Why don't you let these guys go? Then we get to Jesus, Peter, brash Peter. And presumably it was Peter, and is setting it up for something. Peter pulls his sword and lopes off a guy's ear. A story that is told in multiple other, I'm not sure if it's in all the synoptics or not, but here he's identified as Peter. I don't think he's always identified. Go by memory, I should have looked that one up. Also, here the victim is identified quite clearly as who it is. Now, in the other Gospels, this is the point at which, when Jesus kind of scolds them, that they all run away. John doesn't have them running away. We presume or assume that they run away because Jesus had predicted you will all scatter. But John doesn't specifically say it here. So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. And they're taking him away. Now, next we get to, and we'll talk about it before we read it. John here also diverges from the synoptics. In the synoptics, Jesus is paraded before the Sanhedrin for a trial. Jesus has a trial before the Jewish leaders in the other synoptics. Jesus does not have a trial before the Jewish leaders in John following his arrest. The only thing with the Jewish leaders is he is brought before Annas. He is brought before Annas. Ooh, excuse me. However, Annas actually never speaks. We're told what question he asks, or we're told that he questioned Jesus, but he doesn't speak. Jesus is the only one that speaks, except for the guard who slaps him. But Annas does not. Even after at the conclusion of it, we're told that Annas sent him to go see Caiaphas, the high priest. But Annas doesn't actually speak that. Why? Why is all that important? Or why doesn't John go into the Jewish trial? Because the Jewish trial has already taken place. We remember back a few chapters, and that's what started this whole thing, was they had, following Lazarus's death and Jesus raising him from the dead, his resurrection, they had made the decision to kill Jesus. In fact, Caiaphas said, it's better for one person to die than for everybody, right? If John were to have another trial here, it would be redundant. There is no point to having another trial. They've had the trial. They convicted Jesus. They've sentenced him to death. They said he must die. That's all taken place a few chapters ago, like 6 or 7 at this point. So now the important thing then for John is the Roman trial, his trial before Pilate. All right. So let's read. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Pause. We're going to pause right there. Who was the other disciple? We don't know. Tradition says, oh, it must have been John. It must be the author of the gospel. It doesn't say that. But it's the disciple that Jesus loved. No, it does not say that either, right? All it says is another disciple. When John the author wants to speak of the disciple whom Jesus loved, he always adds that phrase, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Here he just says another disciple. Remember, for John, the names of the disciples in most cases don't mean anything. He's not concerned about their names. He's really only mentioned a few of them by name throughout the whole book, right? Judas, Peter, Andrew, James and John. I think James and John, right? Oh, he's only mentioned like 5 or 6, or Nathaniel and Philip. Those are 2 of the big ones. He does not name all 12 disciples. And he only speaks about the disciples as being 12 once, and for a very specific reason at that point. So for John, the number of disciples can be much greater than that. So we don't have to think that this other disciple is one of the 11 remaining disciples. He can be one of the other disciples, one of the extras. They are all disciples as far as John is concerned. It could be anyone. Thinking that it is not one of the disciples whom we know will make sense in a little bit too, keeping that in mind. All right. So we don't know who he is. He's just another unnamed disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. Pause. When we think about Jesus's disciples, most of them were fishermen. Almost all of them, when we think of the 12, I should say, most of them were fishermen. Almost all of them were from Galilee. How would any of them whom we know the high priest and be granted access into this area, especially on this night in this situation? So it is far more likely when we think about that, and far more logical if we think that this disciple is not one of the usual 12, but one of the extra disciples, somebody who perhaps is from Jerusalem or in that area somewhere in Judea, has followed along and is known to Caiaphas, is known to the high priest, and then is granted some of this special stuff. All right, continuing. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of his man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Pause. Ooh, two things to pause for. One, notice the wording on her sentence. You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you? It's a kind of a weird sentence structure, but because it's almost rhetorical. The expected answer is no, based on the way it's written in Greek. The question is asked expecting the answer to be no. You aren't one of his disciples, are you? So expecting the no. What is Peter's reply? I am not. Just think back like 10 verses, 12 verses. What is Jesus's reply to the arresting people? I am. And here Peter is saying, I am not. Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them and warming himself. Pause. So again, Peter's not a big actor. He's just there, almost connecting that with Judas. A similar description, that Judas was just there with the guards, and now Peter is just there with the guards. Okay, continuing. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly into the world. I have always taught in synagogue and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Pause. So it's interesting structure. We're kind of going back and forth between these scenes, inside and outside, and the way they're written, we should see them as taking place at the same time, not consecutive actions, but concurrent, occurring both inside and outside at the same time. That builds the drama. So the way it's written, sort of like a meanwhile back at the ranch thing. So we've got Jesus inside, being taken inside, arrested. We get outside, with Peter. We go back inside, Jesus being questioned by Annas, and then we're going to go back outside to Peter again. So it's a cool structure. It's a really cool structure, and it builds drama and it builds tension. It builds drama and builds tension the way it's done. Then we get tied up with that idea of high priest. Annas is described as the high priest, but then we're also told that Caiaphas was the high priest that year, and that Annas was Caiaphas's father-in-law, and Annas was a high priest, not like the year before. Remember, although technically you're high priest for life, the Romans, under the Roman rule, they controlled who was actually going to be the high priest. So although Annas had been high priest and technically should have continued to be high priest as long as he was alive, Caiaphas had been put in place as the high priest. Not immediately after Annas. Annas had 4 sons who also served as high priest in between, each one only serving most likely, whatever, just a couple years at a time before we get to Caiaphas. So since Annas had been high priest, he still had a certain degree of respect and honor by others, and they still treated him as high priest because technically he should have still been high priest. Not that he was necessarily a good one, but for various reasons, he was removed. Others were put in, they were removed, and now we're up to Caiaphas. And perhaps that's what John is saying when he refers to Annas as high priest, that he should have still been high priest, but he wasn't because of Rome. And Caiaphas is only high priest because of Rome. So he might have some of those things underneath there. Let's not get tied up on that too much, okay? It really doesn't have anything to do with either of them. But again, notice Annas doesn't speak in that whole thing. We're told that he questions Jesus. Jesus speaks and answers. And again, they think that violence is necessary, and he is immediately slapped by a guard, saying, "How dare you speak to that? All I did was speak the what? Truth. Truth." One of those themes that just keeps coming back, and we almost miss it because we just read over it too quick, perhaps. So Annas sends him bound to Caiaphas, which doesn't mean a thing, and nothing really happens there. Instead, where am I at? We're not even told anything about it. They take him to Caiaphas, but then immediately take him to Pilate. All right, so finishing up this section, and this is going to finish us up for today. I want to save part of 18 for Monday and carry it into at least a little bit into 19. See some really good connections that way when we do that. So now, Simon Peter, notice that now, because the author wants us to, everything's happening rapidly and happening at the same time. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." Pause. Same as I said before, you are not also one of his disciples. It's written, in Greek, it's written expecting a negative. And he doesn't, he does deny it. He does give that negative. And instead of saying, "I am," like Jesus had said, he again says, "I am not." But one of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Pause. Ooh, okay. So this isn't nobody. This is a person who actually saw me there. And we're told, Peter's not, but we're told. So let's just make the whole thing we're told. We're told that this is somebody who saw Peter there and is actually related to the guy whose ear Peter lopped off. Oh, Peter's trapped. Peter's trapped. He's going to have to confess. He's going to have to admit to it. Verse 27, again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, the cock crowed. Pause. And that last question, the one from this person said, did I not see you? It's not written the same way as the other two. It's not written expecting a negative. This man knows what he saw and knows who he saw. So it's phrased differently. He's really expecting a positive. He's expecting a yes to this, but he gets the no. Peter denied it, and at that moment, the cock crowed. Okay, friends, that's where we will end today. That's where we will end this week's series of readings. We're going to pick up there on Monday. Trust me when I say it makes sense to stop there and to not go any further. So, my friends, how is it with your soul? Finish up this week asking that question. And as you go about, I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something in what we've said, what we've done, read, said this morning. I pray that God has spoken to you in some way as you go about your days. Keep those, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, both physical and spiritual, open to what God is doing, our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, God, and then tell somebody about it. Okay. Until we meet again, be blessed, my friends. Be blessed. Bye.